is at the top of their game. I'd like to welcome and introduce you all to Craig Alexander, a very good friend of mine, and someone that I've personally known and worked with now since 2012, so just on 8 years. As I said in some of the material leading up and advertising this event, Craig was already a 5 times World Ironman champion before we met. So I have no credit for the success that Craig had, but there's a lot that's happened since, and in terms of the sustainability of all of that, that I know, more self-awareness has made a difference, and Craig will speak to that as we get into today. For those of you who might be new to today, I'll give you a little bit of background on the company and what we're doing. So our business, it was all around Instinctive Drives, which is helping people understand what drives them and makes them tick. And we use that technology primarily with organizations to help them understand each other, when they're working in teams, understand each other better, and then collaborate right across the organization. Personally, I have an absolute passion using this type of insight in sport with athletes. And I've, had a lot of different experiences there. One of my favorites, of course, is working with Craig, because it's very success driven. You can really see and measure the impact of what you're doing, and it's just been a really exciting journey to work with someone who is truly at the top of his game. So once a month, once COVID started, we began these webinars every week as a means of helping people stay at their best and in stride with who they are, so that they would navigate the waters or the turbulent waters of COVID a little easier. And they've proven really popular, and I'm just always getting feedback and looking for ways to improve them. And one of the things I thought would be really valuable to do is just once a month interview somebody who, to me, in my and our experience, our being the team's experience working with them, they're really an authentic example of what living in stride looks like. And not only their success in their chosen career would evidence that, but the way they live their life with their family, with their health, with the holistic approach would be somebody that we could maybe learn a lot from. And so last month we interviewed Jesper Anderson, who's the CEO of Infoblox, who's just an outstanding leader and has had a phenomenal success journey with their company. And this month I asked Craig if he would come along and share with us some of the insights that he's learned and used in Ironman and sport generally. But so many of those things are really applicable across life, aren't they? And I'm sure you will get that today. And it's not all about ID. There are some ID elements that I'll ask, and I'm sure Craig will refer to them anyway. But in terms of leadership and just being at your best, I'm sure you just get some really good general insights from our discussion. I thought I'd start by asking Craig a few questions and then open it up to, I was going to say to the floor, but to the room, to our virtual screens around the world, to invite your questions of Craig as well. We are recording the session, so if anyone would like to go back over it afterwards, we post it onto our website a little later today. You can share it and go back in and listen to it, and whatever gold nuggets might be there, I'm sure you can exploit the hell out of them as the months and years go on. So with that, let's get started. Again, welcome, Craig. Thanks for giving up your time to come here today. Maybe it might be good for you to give a little introduction of you and your background, particularly someone who, when Craig got first met, told me he was into soccer originally, but soccer's a long way from triathlon, so it is an interesting journey.
Yeah, well, thanks. First of all, thanks for inviting me to come on, and thanks to everyone who's taken time out of their day to join us. My, journey to triathlon or in sport was no different to any other kid's journey in Australia. As you know, with our culture, we grow up very outdoors lifestyle. Like most kids, like most of my friends, I played a whole range of sports, mainly team sports growing up, and soccer was my main sport. I played for 15 years until I was 20, to quite a high level. And it was, and probably still is, my sporting passion, to be honest. I watch most of the games with my son now. I coached his team this year, and I just love the game. Had aspirations of being a professional soccer player, and it didn't work out for a number of reasons. The main one usually is you just weren't good enough, or you weren't able to seize the opportunities when they presented. But I always had an affinity for endurance events as well. I liked the idea of pushing yourself further and further and being challenged. And it's interesting because as a schoolboy athlete, I was as good in the sprint events as I was in the long distance events. The thing with a sprint event, though, is it's over before you have time to think about it.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of being able to, I guess, problem solve and go into damage control and sort of just push myself. I like that challenge of having to go into damage control sometimes and find ways through, which in the sprint events, you didn't really, it was over in the blink of an eye. So I did quite well throughout my high school years in cross country and track and field. So I felt I had, we choose a sport, but in some ways a sport chooses us as well based on our genetics. And I must have had, I guess, the right stuff for endurance sports. And so I was at university studying to be a physiotherapist at Sydney Uni. My soccer career had come to an end at 20. I still had this passion to be an athlete. I didn't know what it would lead to, whether it would be a profession or more of a lifestyle thing, but I just wanted to be heavily involved in sports. And I jumped straight into running, actually, to get in shape. I was at university. I was living the uni life after coming through soccer, probably spending more time at the uni bar than in the lecture hall. And my mum just one day said to me, you've always been so active, you need a tonic, you need to get back into shape. So I just started running, and I started doing what they call biathlons, which are swim-run races. And natural progression that led into triathlons about a year later. I was around 21 years of age, and I found my calling because I loved the sport from the very first race I did, which was not far from here at Kurnell in southern Sydney.
The sprint.
Yeah, it was the first race I ever did, and it just felt right. It just felt amazing to be out there exercising at a high level and racing, being competitive, being challenged. And it never crossed my mind not to finish the university degree. I finished my degree and went on to graduate from Sydney Uni in 97, but I would consider myself, I was more a triathlete at that point than an academic or a uni student. And one thing led to another. I got a professional license very early on in my career. Actually 12 months into being a triathlete, I was offered a pro license and started racing the professionals. And professional is a funny term because by definition, I guess it means you make a living from the sport, but it's also an intent and a way you act and behave every day. And I was far from a professional, but I was learning. And so that was the professional side of things. Sort of got into the sport, had intended to work as a physio, but immediately on graduating, I got invited to race in Europe for a team over there. And the sport, like a lot of sports, in Australia, we're in the Southern Hemisphere and we're a long way from the rest of the world. In our sport, the main circuits were Europe and North America. So they were the places you had to get to. And I was able to get there early, continue my apprenticeship, as I called it. And I was lucky enough to take my then girlfriend, now wife. So I've been very lucky. I've shared the whole journey with my wife. Neri and I have been married 21 years in January, and we've been together 27 years. So she was with me before I was a triathlete, and has shared the whole journey. And it's made, I often think that, how would have my life looked without her, and would have I been a good athlete? I think I had the potential to be a good athlete, but I don't think I could have accomplished what I did with the consistency and the longevity without Neri and the support I had. And obviously we've got 3 young kids now too. So that's why I was a little late this morning doing the school drop off. But so life is good. And that's been my journey. Of course, has been like any journey. You hope it trends up, but it's kind of like the stock market. It peaks and troughs along the way. So there's been a lot of lessons learned. And I feel very fortunate to, I was still racing into my 40s very competitively, and I'm 47 now, and I won an Australian title last year. So still very competitive. It's not my day-to-day priority like it used to be, and that's a good thing.
So now you only train about 6 hours a day.
Not 6, I wish 6, but I still train every day. But I have other things that take precedence over the training, and that never used to be the case. So
I should have mentioned Craig's ID for those of you who are really familiar with the ID model. It's 7643 are the numbers, and for those of you who are new, so there are 4 different drives. The Instinctive Verify is a strong drive in Craig, and that's his drive for not only thinking things through and weighing them up and wanting to analyze them, but it's a real problem solving, the complexity, the more complex and challenging it is to figure something out, the more that drive is really fulfilled. And you mentioned that, one of the things that attracted you to triathlon was the fact that it's not a sprint. There's stuff that goes wrong. You got to figure it out. And it's like this challenge of always problem solving all the way through an event. So that's the verify drive. The 6 is for authenticate. The authenticate is the hands-on drive. And the more that you are exerting yourself physically, doing something that's really expending all you've got physically, mentally, emotionally, the more fulfilled that drive is. And a strong drive in Craig as well. So I guess a lot of people who are a similar combination of Craig end up in sports that are either like martial arts or triathlon, something that's really physically grueling. So it was sort of no surprise there. And then the 4 is complete. Complete is the instinct to have a plan and really work very methodically through the plan. Those people who are 4 or anything below 5 is what we call avoid, which means you have a plan, but then you tend to adjust it depending on, you've got your goal in mind where you want to get to, and then you tend to adjust it to make sure you hit the goal, as opposed to just following the plan because it's the plan that you set out to do. And the 3 is for improvise. So 7, 6, 4, 3. The 3 in improvise is the drive that thrives when people are really under the pump and under pressure, doing things either on the fly at the last minute, having to pull that sort of rabbit out of the hat, as it were. But the more their back's against the wall, the better they perform. And Craig is a 3, which means when he's under that sort of pressure, which is interesting when you're at the world standard, you'd think there's a ton of pressure. But I've experienced, like in Kona and other times, where things happen at the last minute that weren't what you were expecting. That's not exactly, the best situation for you, is it? The more he's prepared and can anticipate, the better that is, away from that sort of noise. In fact, solitude is one of the attributes of that drive. And I remember there's some really fun times we had in my hotel room, actually in Kona, where Craig was escaping all the noise and coming and just hanging out where there was, nice quiet time before a race, just to get centered. And it's all about the mental prep rather than everything else physically.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a physical endeavor, but like most sports, the key element to success is the mental side of it. Every athlete on the start line has trained to a similar level. There's no secrets to endurance training. And in fact, a lot of the top guys and girls train together as well. So it comes down to your decision making and also your motivation and, I guess, your performance mindset. And that race week in Kona is sort of a collision of mental focus and preparation with the business side of the sport.
We've got a ton of sponsors that you're trying to look after as well, right?
Absolutely. And for me, that's where I would always try and prepare so well, because I felt good preparation would trump all the last minute monkeys in the wrench, so to speak. But, and I guess as an athlete, your dream is to have sponsors and to be supported. And companies, when they partner with you because of what you, I guess, bring to the table in terms of your performances and your values, it's not a donation. They're trying to leverage that relationship. And a lot of that is showing up places, meeting people. And for me, that was energy draining rather than energy providing. And I was happy to do it all year, but not race week.
Right.
Race week was about getting my mind ready to go to places that I knew were hard and were challenging. And one of the confronting things about the race in Hawaii and the sport in general is, you get challenged mentally. There's times when you can take the easy option. You have to be prepared physically, but more so mentally to meet that challenge. And I needed that solitude. I needed to visualize. I had different strategies that prepared me for battle, so to speak. And I just felt that some of that control was taken away from me when my manager would run in and say, "Oh, this company wants to do an impromptu Q&A or meet and greet down the street." The one thing with an 8-hour race too is you're trying to replenish your energy reserves, because it's a tough race. And Hawaii's very hot. You don't want to be out in the sun, standing on your legs in the days leading up to the race. So for me, that was counterintuitive to performing well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're doing what makes perfect sense to them. It's where all the hype is for the week. Yes. They want to leverage all of that. and yet it's the last thing. And then when we add the ID lens in, where for you, the more you feel in control, have the solitude, can be fully prepped, it doesn't include any of that activity. So it's ironic that they want you to win because that's better for their brand, and yet they can be doing the things that are really counterproductive.
Well, it was an interesting lesson too, because when you become part of a team, like as an individual athlete, it was all about yourself and my family. Neri and I were the team for a long time.
Right.
And 90% of your income comes from prize money. So it's all results driven. It's about performance. That's where you get the positive feedback and the financial rewards as well. And then when you partner up with companies, it's not that they don't want you to win, but it's not their primary goal. Their primary goal is to sell product and to leverage the partnership to sell things. And sometimes those things can conflict. And that can lead to resentment. It was an interesting lesson, actually, as the team, even though it was an individual sport, the team grew with more success. So there were more personalities to deal with. And my manager, he was often thrown under the bus, but, it was, for me, that was the real learning in the back end of my career, because you get to a point physiologically where, you've surpassed that steep part of your improvement and you've started to plateau off in terms of your physiological ceiling, I guess. And you're investing a lot of time and effort and energy, but you're at that point in your journey where you're only realizing incremental, like micro percentage point improvements. So the real learnings for me came with that dynamic around the sponsors and the team. And it's, as I said, it wasn't that they didn't want me to win, but if the whole industry and the media focus was that week, they wanted to capitalize on that. And I always used to say, well, I'm just going to roll the dice and be invisible this week, but win on race day. And then you can capitalize. But
so Craig, if you go back to the beginning of where you started and you were a schoolboy athlete, a local athlete, that's a long way from world champion. So when did it occur to you that, or what happens in your mind that made you ultimately think, I can take this to that sort of standard? Because I think many people are successful, many people achieve, many people on this call, for example, are outstandingly successful in whatever they're doing, but not all of us think that we would become number one in the world at something. Where did that come from in you to chase that?
It's a good question. It has a couple of layers. I think that the first thing is that education, that physio degree, set me up well for my professional sporting career. Just the education I got through that, learning about the principles of physiology and endurance training. And I understood how endurance training worked, and the overriding principle was consistency over time. And also, the more you read about it too, and you and I have talked about this, the 10,000 hour rule. Is it 10,000 hours to become world class, or is it 15 or 5? Whatever it is, it's a lot of hours. And so that set my expectation early that I wasn't going to come into this sport as a 21-year-old and be a world champion by next Christmas. It was going to be a longer journey, and did I have the stomach for it? Did I have the mental drive and the stomach? And I did. I think the one thing that really left a bad taste in my mouth with my soccer career was that it just ended so quickly. And, I was too young and I guess not mature enough to understand that there's meant to be hardship and challenges. I just thought if I'm meant to be a professional footballer, I'm meant to make every selection, I'm meant to make every team. And when that didn't happen, and it only didn't happen once or twice, I just folded up the tents and went home. So what I brought forward into my 20s and I guess my triathlon career was just a commitment to be more resilient. I just thought this is going to be a long journey and I just need to ride out the storm. Sometimes it's not always going to be perfect. And I just had this picture in my mind I used to look up to the great athletes in sports, men and women in all sports, like Roger Federer was a big one. And when from the outside looking in, it just looks like everything's perfect and always has been. And then the more reading I did, I worked out that some of these iconic athletes, weren't even prodigies as childhood athletes. And some of them weren't even touted to have great professional careers. But you see that that's the journey. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, as they say. It's it's more than that. And so that's the first thing I brought in, this commitment just to be more resilient and to not quit before the magic happens, so to speak, just to hang in there long enough to reap the rewards of all the hard work. And it was just something about the sport I loved. It just spoke to me. Like I can't remember in any sporting event having as much joy and that sort of light bulb moment as that very first triathlon when I was out there competing with other athletes. And I just loved it. And I thought, this is a sport for me. It's physical, which I love, but there's some problem solving. It's challenging. You get confronted. Do I quit now or do I push on? You know, you get to that moment in every race, whether you're at entry level or trying to win world titles, where it's the critical moment where you push on to something great or you just fade back through the field. That happened in the very first race, and it happens in every race. And that I enjoyed that challenge, being able to set the bar a little bit higher than last year. So there was that element of it. And I think too, there's one, I guess, perspective, the genetics, that natural talent that you hear people talk about, which we as humans have no control in. So I didn't know if I was going to have the genetics that would lead to world titles. But I thought, you know, as I said, I don't want to stop this journey before I get there and find out. And I just want to get the most out of myself. I really want to extract every ounce of potential. And, you know, you often hear people say, you know, sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Well, I think as an athlete, I wanted to see the forest and the trees. I understood what the end game was. I wanted to be world class. I wanted to be vying for world titles. But that was going to be years down the track. So I needed to have shorter term goals and be able to monitor my progress as well. So I needed to be able to see the forest and the trees and not lose. I needed to have stepping stones along the way to be inspired and you know.
But the good thing for you is you enjoyed all of those trees along the way. It sounds like, you know, the whole thing. It wasn't like you went through some grueling process that you hated in order to get the prize. You had the benefit of being able to enjoy every step along the way as well.
But it wasn't without its challenges too. I mean, from the sporting side and the physical side, I could see myself trending up every couple of months, every year. And I thought, this is heading in the right direction. But this is when I guess my relationship with Neri, my wife, was very important because, you know, I started the sport late. I'm in my 20s. Most elite athletes start 8, 9, 10 years of age, do it all through school. They have that sort of pedigree and that background. And when I got to 25, 26, you know, our I guess, social group are having kids, are setting up careers. And for me, that's where some of the hardships and the challenges came in. And that's where I needed Neri, because I said to her on a number of occasions, you know, I can retire at any time, because it was a huge sacrifice for her as well. I mean, on the face of it, it looks good, and it was good. We were traveling around. She would come with me, to live in France that first summer, and then come and have stints when I did 2 or 3 more seasons in Europe. And when I went to the US, when I finally got to the US, Neri would come, but there were sacrifices for her. She worked a lot when we were in Australia to sort of bankroll a lot of that. And then when we went away, she had to stop working, which was a huge sacrifice for her because she loved her job. So for me, a lot of the challenges were more around the personal side of things. Am I being selfish? Is it expecting too much of my girlfriend, fiance, wife to give up so much for me? I could see physically I was improving and I was heading in the right direction, but there's just so many sacrifices. Neri's very close to her family as well, her siblings and her mum and dad. And we lost her dad last year, unfortunately. And, you know, being away from them for 6 months of the year was very hard for her.
Yeah.
So they were the challenges that I faced. It was more on the personal side of things. And is this the right thing to do? And she was always reassuring, never hesitated. I mean, because I said to her probably 5, maybe 10 times, you know, if this is not the right thing for us, I can retire. And she said, no, you're improving. Let's just keep pushing on. So they were the challenges that I faced more so, just around.
Certainly delivered. So let's wind the clock forward to when we met. And I know a lot of people are interested to understand the connection between ID and, you know, how you've used that in whatever way, particularly as an athlete, but also holistically. So maybe share, because as I said at the intro, you had already won world titles when we met. So what impacted you? Maybe share what you got from it, or what impacted you to sort of grab it and keep moving forward with it.
Well, what I got from it was probably the greatest gift, which I think anyone can get, is self-awareness. I started understanding some of the habits I had and some of the mental strategies that I'd employed. And,
what were some of them?
One of the things that actually my wife suggested I do way back when was read my training diary a lot.
She's been pretty important, this one.
Yes,
of yours.
yeah. Well, she knew me very well, so she has been very important. Yeah, and she said to me one time early in my career, "Why don't you read your training diary? I think it'll be good for you to do that." And at that time in the sport, we were coming into an age where innovation was coming in and was infiltrating sport like it had the rest of our lives, and there was a lot of wearable technology, GPS, heart rate monitors that would track your training and would upload onto a software somewhere. And I used all of that, but mainly that was for my advisors. What I used to do was I had a handwritten training diary, which you've seen. And just the process of writing in that every night was therapeutic and reassuring for me. It was like doing the training all over again, writing it out. And then I would read it extensively in the lead up to big races, particularly the race in Hawaii, when I'd be in my hotel room that last week. I would read it, and it was always reassuring because, you might think if you go back over the last 12 months' work, you might see some things that would undermine your confidence. But again, coming back to the physio degree, one of the most important things that I learned that related to my triathlon journey was the key principle in any successful endurance training program is consistency of work over time, accumulation of work over time. That's how we get the fitness adaptations the best, is repetition. And that's how it works mentally as well, actually, with visualization and all of those things. So when I would read that training diary, I would always see incredible consistency. I would not miss a session ever. Even to the point where I remember having sponsorship obligations in the city, and I would have swum in the morning. I'd go in, I'd come back at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. I'd have dinner with Neri, and then I would go up into my garage and get on the indoor trainer for 2 hours and then run 90 minutes because that was what was on the program. And it wasn't that I wasn't flexible enough to change the program. It was a discipline thing, and I knew I could still get those sessions done even though I was going to 1 a.m. And I guess the reassurance I got from that consistency, and I remember one of the guys I was working with at the time, Dave Scott, he has iconic status in our sport.
Yep.
For people who are golfers out there, he's kind of like the Jack Nicklaus of triathlon.
Yeah, he is. Yep.
He was an advisor, and he's become a really close friend, actually. And he's got a great sense of humor. And Neri must have told him about some of these things that I used to do when I'd come home late and still get the training done. And he'd say, "That's just crazy. There's no physical benefit to that." And he was right. I wasn't doing it for the physical benefit. I was doing it for other reasons.
Right.
But I understood the importance of it to me. And I would think of those things during challenging weeks in training. And in the race, I would think of those really challenging days and sessions all the time, those specific sessions where I was still training at 1 or 2 in the morning to get it in, and just how consistent I'd been. So when I would read back through that training log, I would see amazing consistency, and it was always reassuring. And another, I guess, parameter in endurance training is volume. There was always a huge volume of work in there, so that was therapeutic for me. And
did you ever meet an athlete that trained more than what you had?
Yeah, there was a few.
Oh, there were?
Yeah, there definitely was, and I think that's why you need. I got a lot of confidence from the physical preparation, but you need other strings to your bow as well, because there are athletes who, and there's always going to be someone who does more than you or at a higher quality than you. So I was about sort of having more strings to the bow and more, I guess, arrows in the quiver, so to speak. But that was always a big part of because I didn't come through as a junior athlete. I didn't feel I had the pedigree of the athletes I was racing, and I suffered from a lack of confidence in the beginning, actually. I didn't think I belonged on their level. And I made up that with an incredible work ethic and physical preparation. But another thing from the ID that I got, And when we'd met, I was, I guess, grappling with the idea, should I continue on with this career? Because I had other opportunities presenting. And the life of an athlete is very self-centered. I don't want to say selfish. It can be selfish. I would like to think I'm not a selfish person, but maybe you need to ask Neri and the people around me. But it's very self-centered. There's a lot of self-evaluation, self-reflection. Is my training on track? Have I slept enough this week? How's my diet? What about my strength and conditioning? Have I had enough massage? A lot of me, and you get to a point in your life where you're a husband, a father, and it's kind of a paradox to the way you're meant to think, particularly as a father, as a dad.
Yeah.
All this self-reflection, having the whole family's routine tied up around your career and what you're doing. And I was starting to feel guilty, and you know that. And one of the things you said to me with my ID, you need a higher purpose. It can't just be, that struck a very deep chord with me, because at that point I'd already won 5 world titles. So is it greedy to want more? I mean, why do you want more? How does that change who you are or your family? I mean, I was never motivated by money, but when you become a father, you have to provide as well. So that became a consideration, the financial consideration around, do I pursue business opportunities, or do I keep going with the sporting career? If I keep going with a career, there's only one way I know how to do it, which is 365 days a year, 24/7 commitment. Is that fair on the people around me who have already lived through that for 20 years? So you telling me to get a higher purpose. And it was around that time I was starting to get approached by different charities to be their ambassador. And that conversation came right at the right time, because I did become, I guess, the ambassador for a few of those charities. And it made me feel much better about what I was doing. It's a funny thing being an athlete, you know, because I think in society and in our culture and a lot of countries, we celebrate athletes a lot. And I know I was awarded an Order of Australia medal, which it's a high honour in our country. And I was humbled and surprised, actually. But then we went in for the ceremony, and it's at Government House, and the Governor General calls you up and he pins your medal on. And I was in the line behind one of the world's leading professors in cancer research. So he was the guy in front of me. And the guy behind me was a first responder who'd been serving our state for 30 years. He was one of the first on the scene at the Granville train disaster, you will remember.
Yeah. He
was also on the scene at the Thredbo disaster down in the snow. And I'm listening to their resumes being read out and what they've contributed to society. And then it's my turn to come up, and they basically just read out race results. This world title, that world title, which it's great, but you're serving yourself. And then I looked down into the audience and I saw Neri, and she was so proud. And I mean, she's an emergency nurse. She serves the community every day more than I do. So yeah, I was just getting to that point in my life where I was starting to question why I was doing, because I think a lot of, you hear people talk about, what's my why? My why had always been just to be resilient and to get the most out of myself, to fulfill my potential, not knowing whether I had the genetics to go all the way. And then I think as we change as people, our why can change as well. Certainly becoming a husband and a father, I was very motivated to make sure that all the sacrifices that people around me were making, I honored those commitments. But then you get to a point where you've climbed the mountain multiple times. And I was very competitive. I was more than willing to go through it all again, but I was getting a wider perspective, I guess, around family and other things. And so that conversation around my ID, I needed a greater purpose. It couldn't just be winning for the sake of winning, which it had been for 2 decades.
So that led more to you sustaining your career, right, as opposed to necessarily increasing your performance. I think this is a really important thing for how people can use higher self-awareness. It's one thing to use it from a performance point of view. The other is sustainability, because the more that you're in stride and holistically in stride, the more you don't have those it's all about the conversations in your head, isn't it?
Yeah.
A perspective. Like you can say, well, standing there at government house, I haven't really contributed, but that's by you're using comparisons of first responders and a professor in cancer research. But if you look at the many people, as for example, kids who got inspired, like so many people, I remember people talking about Leighton Hewitt, and even he himself saying, as a kid at 6 and 7, they've got a photo on the wall of someone who's, their hero, and it lifts their whole life and their career. You've probably done that for gazillions of people without even knowing,
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mention that, because you used to say that to me. Don't underestimate your value to inspire people to start their journey. And again, it's the old scenario of the forest and the trees. When I was training to win world championships, it was just a singular, very specific focus and drive. And that's all in the periphery.
Yeah.
That you miss a lot of the good stuff in life. Now with social media and just traveling around more for promotional purposes, you meet people who will get their phone out and show you a photo of you with them from 15 years ago. And then they tell you how that started their journey and where they are now. And you see the impact of it. But it was retrospective. And you always told me it would be the case.
Yeah.
But I remember getting that medal and the Governor General saying, thank you for your service to the community and for inspiring others. And I was thinking, what's this guy talking about? But you do see it, and you see your impact, and it's nice to feel that it was there was a ripple effect for sure. It gives you a nice feeling that you have impacted other people, and the way that I raced and maybe the way I spoke sort of left a lasting impression with them. And it's one of the nice things now that I enjoy most about my career, actually, more than the performances themselves.
Okay. Interesting, Craig. I'm just conscious of the time, and maybe we should open it up to those of you on the call that might be sitting there burning with some questions that you'd like to ask Craig directly. I can always keep going, but I don't want to be selfish myself and open up to you guys. So is there anyone that you might be on mute? So just be conscious of that when you go to ask. But there she is. Hi, Neri. But anyway, who would like to kick off? Anyone with a question?
I've got a question, Paul, if that's okay.
Yeah, Mike.
Craig, amazing career, and there's certainly a lot of people in Australia that's been following you, and a lot of your Kelowna tri-mates. But I was really interested to see that you're a verifier 7, and I think in my knowledge of ID, I would have thought the 7 combined with your physio career enabled you to perfect your techniques in all those areas of triathlon. I don't think everyone appreciates quite how much technical input is required. Say for swimming, it's 90% technique. Bike riding is probably similar, and running is a highly technical sort of component. And you had the most perfect running technique. Obviously, you perfected over time. And I'm sure that verifying, instinct really drove you to get that right, and to run the hardest part of the triathlon in Hawaii perfectly was an amazing attribute. So well done. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. No, it's the physio degree. It's under the bed collecting dust. Neri thinks that I've never used it, but I used it every day. I used it every day because, just to Paul's point before, when you're training with your competitors, and for a while I was based in San Diego, and for 15 years we were based in Boulder, Colorado, and that's kind of like the epicenter of endurance sports. So a lot of the times and a lot of the sessions I was training with the guys I was going to be racing for world titles against. And one thing that was always front of mind for me was that technical aspect. In a long event, it's not so much about speeding up. It's about not slowing down. It's about efficiency of movement. And that's one thing I learned long before I was a triathlete, was good functional movement patterns lead to less injury and the performance benefits of efficiency. So, I lived in the gym, working on core strength and stability. I had a lot of advisors who would come out and film my sessions in the pool, on the bike, and also on the treadmill running. When I was fresh and under load, to see how it would change and see if we could drill down and really, prescribe things, whether it be in the gym or out on the training track, that would lead to better efficiency and technique, because it is it's a critical part of the race.
Thanks, Mike.
Good on you, Paul. Thanks, Craig.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll
Hi,
jump
Paul.
in. Oh, no, go ahead, Susan.
Susan.
Hi, how are you? Just one question, Craig. I was just wanting to know, how did you mentally prepare when you were about to do your triathlon, given your ID? Is there something that you could give us some insight on there?
Yeah, I used to visualize a lot. So one thing I didn't race in Hawaii until 2007. And it's interesting because it was the first triathlon I ever saw on television in the 80s, the late 80s, on the Wide World of Sports. And I guess it was the race that got me interested in the sport. And then even when I was playing soccer, I used to look, I knew it was in October each year, so I'd look for that race to watch it. And then in 1994, Greg Welsh won, first non-American ever to win. And really that was the catalyst that got me into the sport. So it was the race that I always wanted to do, but I didn't get there for 10 years. I started with the shorter distances, and it's interesting, but I always knew that was my dream, was to race in Hawaii. So it was always there. That was kind of like the end game. And when I finally qualified to get there in 2006, I won the Half Ironman World Championships, which qualified me to go to Hawaii the following year. I made sure I went to Hawaii to train for 2 weeks, 12 months before the race. And I got to learn every inch of the course. I got to learn every undulation. I got to learn where the wind blows from at what time of day. I went and swam on the course in the morning. I rode the course every day. I ran different parts of the course. And with my ID, it helped me a lot, because pretty much every single training session for the next 12 months, at some point during the training, my mind would drift to Kona, to the race. If I was in a tough swim session, I'd think, okay, this could be the second half of the swim near Kona Pier. What are the things I'm focusing on? What are the conditions? Who am I with? And when I got to Kona and raced the first time in 2007, it felt like I'd raced there for a decade. I felt very comfortable. I wasn't surprised by anything that happened. So I used to visualize a lot in every session. I used to imagine I'm behind the 8 ball. I've had a flat tire. What have I got to do? I'm on the bike. How am I going to break this next 2 hours up into bite-sized pieces? What are the stepping stones to get back to where I need to go? Or the other scenario, I'm in the lead. I'm now the hunted. What do I have to do? What do I need to think about? So I did a lot of visualization. And also one thing that I think always helped me, even before I got to Kona, was understanding why I was doing what I was doing. Why was I training 40 hours a week? Why am I out here? Why when the alarm goes off at 4:30 in the morning and it's raining, do I get up and ride to Wollongong and back? I think it's important to understand why you're doing it, and then off the back of that, what your goals are, specifically what it is that you hope to achieve, because there's going to be so many times when you don't want to get up when the alarm goes off. When, Neri and I were overseas and we're missing, in the beginning, it was 21st birthday parties of friends. Then it became weddings and christenings, and there's a lot of sacrifices. So understanding, why I was doing it and what I was trying to achieve, and that I had the support, made it easier to sort of navigate through those tough times. So, and later with the children as well. I remember when my wife was homeschooling our eldest daughter, Lucy, and this was the year we met, actually, in 2012. It was I'd won 2 world titles the year before. I had 23 or 24 sponsors the following year. So I was very busy. We also did a book, which was a crazy idea to throw into the mix that year, but I'm glad we did it in hindsight. And I remember we were in Colorado. I was right in the teeth of my big push phase for Hawaii. And I'd swum in the morning. I was heading out for a 7-hour bike ride, and I was in the kitchen having some breakfast, filling up the water bottles and getting the nutrition all sorted. And Lucy was in the room next to us getting homeschooled. And Neri had done it for most of the time, but then as Lucy got older, we had to get a primary school teacher in, and I could just Lucy she's like Neri. She loves the social aspect. She loves being in class with her friends. So homeschooling was tough for her. And I just remember Lindsay, our tutor, saying, "Come on, Lucy, we went through this yesterday. You know the answer to this." And I had a little peek around the corner, and there's little Lucy just sliding down in her chair lower and lower. And it was like Lindsay, her tutor, was this big drag and just focusing on Lucy. And Lucy didn't know the answer. It was maths, and she didn't like maths anyway. And I thought, this is what everyone is going through, so that I can be over here doing what I want to do. So to your question about the mental side of it, it wasn't always just around performance. It was understanding the sacrifices, and also I didn't feel I had to win to pay them back, but I felt like I had to do everything professionally and run out every ground ball and just get the most out of myself, so that, I could feel good about they were doing it for me, and they were doing it with love and from a good place. And my responsibility was to reflect that and make sure that I got through the tough times the right way and did everything the right way.
Mm.
Great
Okay,
question.
so
Thanks,
10 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Greg.
Oh, it
Your
was
question.
related to that. It was, those moments when the body's saying, "Okay, Craig, this is enough. Let's stop," and you're not gonna. Where you go in your mind to replace that thought, "This hurts. This is too hard. I've had enough," and move to a place and know you're also not damaging yourself. So there's a balance in there. Should I listen? Should I not? And how you would decide, now we're good. You would, and I guess I'm part of it. You go to some visualization, or you remember what you're doing it for or something, but it's those really crucial moments where this is a make or break time. I'm just wondering how you handle that, because to me, that's the separation between top and second place.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it is a great question. Firstly was to understand that I was in control of the pain. And I always used to think of it as a sweet pain, not a sour pain. It's not like I'm not a cancer patient undergoing chemo. I'm in control of this, and I've put myself in this situation. So there was no, at those moments when it gets very hard, it's not woe is me. It's, this is what I want, actually. This is what I've asked for. And this is part of the challenge, is to try and push 5 minutes, 10 minutes into the race further than last year when I get to that moment, and then deal with that moment better than I have before. And part of it was understanding that, I was in control of it. And it's an interesting point, because I never thought I was motivated by money, but you're never 100% sure when something hurts so much. So I'd always said to Neri, my wife, and my manager, I don't want to know how much money we're making. I don't want to know how much these companies are paying. I never want to know that, because I don't want to be running out of the energy lab at 30K thinking, well, there's a safety net. It doesn't matter. It always has to matter to me. And I think the good news for me was that, those thoughts were never in my mind anyway, but I just wanted to remove that out of the equation anyway. But again, Greg, it was just a matter of, that was the challenge. And it wasn't, you don't get into the race and that's sprung upon you, or this is going to hurt. You know that's what's going to happen. And you get to strategize and plan for it all year. And that's part of the visualization. Well, what's the self-talk going to be this year? When it's interesting when you run into this one part of the course in Kona, for those who are familiar with Kona, the bike and the run course is just cut through the lava fields. There's no shade. And they used to have this thing at this part of the course called the energy lab, where they'd have a thermometer and it'd tell you what the temperature was. And they got rid of it after a while because everybody complained. But I actually didn't mind it. One in 2009, I remember running in and it was like 54 degrees or whatever it was. And I thought, well, I knew that's what it would be. That's why I've had ice bars all year. That's why I came out in July to train in the hottest part of the year. And we tried different strategies, different cooling strategies, core body temperature. This is hard, but I'm prepared for it. So, that was part of the self-talk, is just to honor the preparation. And it's easy emotionally when things get hard to lose composure. And my thing was just maintain composure at those moments and just don't let up. Don't let up though. Maybe you're not pushing forward at certain times, but just hold ground when it gets hard. Hold ground, circle the wagons, and then lean into it some more. So
I would add, I mean, just knowing Craig, perspective is everything. So I remember being in Kona with you, and if they were announcing that there was going to be really strong winds out there on the Queen Cape, for example, right? Everyone else would be bitching about the winds, but what was going on in your mind? Because I remember there's the surf is too tough, you know, but it was almost like every time someone else would hear something and want to back down, you were almost using that like fuel.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone likes pain or likes it. If you had a choice between 20 mile an hour winds or 50 mile an hour, you'd probably take the 20.
Yep.
But the thing when the conditions get hard is straight away you rule out 70% of the competition.
Yep, that's it.
And I just thought, well, I'm here to perform, and it's one day, and that's what I've prepared for. And I used to go out and train in Kona, and there used to be a race in June that I would do a half Ironman to prepare. And in June, it's hotter and windier. So it used to surprise me that very few people would go out there. Very few of the professionals would go. I would always go out there. So I experienced the trade winds. In one year, I went out there, I think it was 2009. I did the half Ironman 4 months before the big one, and the wind was so strong, people were getting blown off their bikes. And, you know, you see that. I felt it. I felt getting blown across the road on my bike, and I thought, oh, it's a little scary, but it's not so bad. You get through it. And so come October, if it was going to be windy, I like I said, and nobody wants more pain. I think you'd be lying if you said you wanted that, but you just learn how to cope with it. Yeah. And I just felt it's one day. I'm training for one day and it's going to be over. I mean, I always used to think on the start line, I wasn't thinking about the whole race. I was thinking I had broken up into little stepping stones along the way. And front of mind was when I was treading water on the start line, well, 8.5 hours from now, I'm going to be sitting back in the hotel room and it'll all be over. So just enjoy it and get the most out of it. And then I'd be thinking, just before the gun went off, the next 2 minutes, what do I have to do? Get out quick, get in position. So I brought it back that it wasn't the forest at that point, it was the trees. I was looking right in front of my nose. And, you know, to your point though, Greg, for better or worse, we are who we are. And I think I was worried I was going to hurt myself out there because sometimes I would be so dehydrated, I'd be passing blood in the race. And, you know, as you get older and you have kids, you think, and that was part of the conversation I had with you I had some great races out there. I had 5 world titles and a couple of other podiums on the resume. And I think, I wouldn't say being civilized is a bad thing, but sometimes as an athlete, you don't want to be too civilized because it gets hard and you have to. It's that famous quote in the Rocky movie, isn't it? Rocky 3, I think it is, when Rocky loses to Clubber Lang and his manager Mickey says to him, "You got too civilized, Rocky." You know, sometimes with too much, and this, I guess, is the balance with my ID, because I wanted a lot of information and I wanted to be in control of a lot of things, but I never looked into information around the bad things that could happen from racing in the heat too much. And I remember Neri used to come home from work and say, "Oh, there's this thing that it's called the Ironman syndrome now, and a lot of athletes were having heart problems." And I would ignore until I got older, and then I had kids, and I thought, well, is that being irresponsible to ignore that? So I guess as you change as a person, your perspective and the way you view certain things. I mean, as an athlete in your 20s, you're not even having those thoughts about self-preservation. You're thinking about 5-10 years has been invested into this, and we're going out.
Leave it all on the line. Yeah.
Whereas they're the thoughts you start having later on as a husband and a father, and with other potential opportunities that you might not want to jeopardize. So it's interesting how things change, but it's a good question, Greg, because I think great athletes in all sports are able to override that thing in your mind where we all have governors built into our brain. And I think that's emotionally as well. And maybe in business or tolerance levels that we can get right up to, and maybe even say, you know, we can take a little more. And that's part of being an endurance athlete. You want to override. Your body's telling you to stop because there's these prehistoric safety mechanisms built in to stop you having a heart attack or doing damage to yourself. And physiologically, you can cope with a lot more than when your body's telling you to stop. So you have to override and ignore a lot of those messages. But yeah, it's kind of good to get older and get more civilized as well.
I have a question. It's Gail. I found that I'm listening to you and I'm hearing your ID, the different drives coming out so well. The question I want to know is, how was it for you before you learned ID? Were you using the same training techniques? Did ID change the way you did things? How did finding that out about yourself change it for you?
You know, I try not to have regrets in life. I think things happen and you get what you deserve ultimately. There's always an element of luck. And hopefully if you've got the right people around you, you get what you deserve ultimately. But I do sort of half regret not knowing this a lot earlier in my career, because there were a lot of battles that I fought where I was different, or I was OCD, or I was, and I do have OCD. I mean, my wife tells me that all the time. But a lot of the things where I was trying to go on my own path and I got pushed back from different things when I'd be with so-called experts. And, you know, I remember clearly once having a VO2 max test with a world-renowned endurance coach. And our schedules were so busy, this was the only day we could meet to do it. But it wasn't ideal because I'd raced the day before and I'd just come off a block of 3 races in 3 weeks. So it wasn't ideal to do a VO2 max test. But we did it anyway. And it was at 7,000 feet of elevation too. It was in Colorado Springs. And I'd raced the day before in Canada and I'd traveled through the night to get to Colorado Springs. And we're doing this test. And I just said, no, it's not right. I'm not going to do it before we even got started. And this room full of world-leading experts, well, they couldn't believe that I didn't want to show my wares like a lab rat in front of them, or and I it wasn't right. I was tired, I was fatigued, I hadn't slept. And a VO2 max test is about getting to your absolute physiological limit so they can test how your body and how much oxygen your body's utilizing. So unless you can get to that limit, the test is invalid. But I think there was media there and there was a lot of, and yeah, and that caused a lot of friction after the fact with this coach and with media. And I just thought, you know, I'm not in the business of trying to please these people. You know, I mean, it's being hated is not the goal either. But ultimately, I had Kona coming up in 2.5 months. I was leaving Colorado Springs, having a couple of recovery days and going straight into my final push phase for Kona that year. So there were often situations where I was in a predicament, for want of a better word, and understanding my ID and what was driving me and motivating me and why I thought the way I did would have been really beneficial. Because I felt guilty after that. I thought, have I let this guy down, because I knew he invited all these people there, and just the second guessing.
So it didn't really change your techniques or your strategies, but I think just observing Craig Gale, it gave you a lot more clarity over why you did the things you did and why certain strategies, like even your journal, I mean, Craig's journal, like if I go for a run, wouldn't be anywhere near as long as Craig's anyway, but I might say I went for a run for an hour. I read Craig's journal. It's like went for 1 hour, 6 minutes and 37 seconds, you know, and it was all so precise. Everything was there. And I think it was understanding the value of a lot of the strategies Craig was using were bang on for what worked for him, but it was great reassurance to know that was what was working. And there were other things that were big distractions, especially for me. I'd say the solitude piece was eye-opening, particularly in that race week in Kona, because you feel torn about giving your time to all these other people. And I remember we got really emphatic about having that time where you could just chill and get away, you know, and have time on your own, just regroup mentally. Yeah,
well, it got to, and I don't, you know, I never like to use the expression "you're a victim of your own success." Success is amazing, and that's what you strive for. And and that's an outcome. Hopefully the process and the journey is good too, and you've learned a lot, because that's where you do most of your learning. But I used to think, after we'd met and I'd done my ID, knowing about the solitude and wanting to sort of just replenish myself mentally and physically in race week, that probably wasn't going to be possible, because going to that race as a past champion and having that many sponsors, you are going to be down in the expo for 7 or 8 hours a day.
Yep.
So, that factored into my decision making moving forward of whether I wanted to go back, and also the selfish piece as well, or wanting a higher purpose. But I just think, Gail, understanding why we do some things, like one of the things that you always said to me is that often there's not right or wrong. It's what's right for you in a situation, and surrounding yourself with strategies so you can just be free and be unshackled to do the things, to get to be in stride, as you used to say. So I would try and do that, but then I would have these feelings of, have I let this person down? Why are they not understanding? You talk about the precision thing with my ID when we'd set the bike up.
Yep.
A lot of athletes would just let other people do it. I'd want to be there. I'd let the experts do it, but I want to be there. And then when we would get to races, a lot of athletes would just take their bike off to someone to build. I would want to build my own bike, because I'd seen many times bikes, mechanical deficiencies in races costing people performances, and I just thought, well, it's my bike. Ultimately, I'm responsible for it. So I educated myself around, building the bike up and how many Newton meters you need to torque a certain bolt here or there. And I mean, every race there was just a trail of stories after the event, of people this had broken or that had broken. And I just thought, well, I don't see myself as an overly controlling person. I was happy. I mean, one of the things about my ID that you highlighted was, I'm a tough sell in the beginning, but once you're in, you're in. Right. I trust you. So I had people I trusted to do it, but I also felt, you know what? It's part of, I guess, my idea and my preparation that I want to oversee this as well. And it's my bike. So I want to make sure it's set up the way I like it. And
there's no one else to blame then.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even about blame. I just saw it as my role. I mean, I'm not going to be one of these entitled athletes who's delegating. There was a lot to delegate, but a lot of those performance things, it's my bicycle. I ride it.
Yeah.
I broke it down. I need to build it up. I need to know how to do that.
Yeah.
Just a lot of things the other athletes thought I was crazy with, and the family thing. A lot of the athletes in Boulder, I was the only person taking their family. And I remember early in the summer, we'd go out training, and a lot of the other athletes would say, "Oh, I can't believe you've brought your wife and kids. How are you going to recover between sessions?" And I guess there was a downside to that, but I knew the upside would be that I'd have Neri and the kids there. And emotionally, I would just be motivated to smash every session. And that's it, having them there far outweighed not having them there. And it was kind of like this mantra or this unwritten rule that as an athlete, when you went into your Kona preparation, you didn't travel with your family. But even one or two of the guys who would say to me, "I can't believe you've brought your family over with you," or brought your family over with you. A month or two later, the conversation would turn, and they were like, "Oh, I'm so homesick. I'm missing." And I'm like, "Well, yeah. So you are more like me than you think. Just because everybody else is not bringing their family, it's no reason not to do it the way that suits you best." So,
Craig, I'm just aware of the time. We've just gone a little bit over. So for those of you, we normally do finish right on time. And for those of you need to leave, please feel free to go. We'll keep recording. But if it's okay with you, Craig, we might just indulge a couple more minutes, because there's some great questions that people have asked in the chat. I know there's one there from Andrew, who I think you knew, and it was, see right at the top there, what's next for a 5-time world champ? So for those of you who want to stay on for just a few more minutes, we might just go to 1:15 and give like a bit of bonus time here, because I think it's such an interesting conversation and people really, I think, have a couple more questions. So what is next for a 5-time world champ?
A lot. There's a lot next. I mean, I still have 12 great partners, sponsors, and my priority is to give value to them, because I feel I gave value to them. There's a lot of ways to leverage a partnership. Part of it is performance. And I guess in a performance industry, the greatest endorsement is high performance. So, but also there's more to it. There's the personal side. And, I know a lot of times my partners would have liked me to travel around more to their key audiences around the world. So I'm committed to doing that. And I have been for 5 years now, a lot more travel. And I'm committed to delivering to them on a lot of different fronts, product R&D as well. And a lot of the things that when you are just focused on performance, they're in the periphery and they're not the priority. So
Do you still want to compete? I think that's what everyone wants to know.
yeah, I do. I mean, I raced last year. I won an Aussie title last year. I think I was the oldest male or female ever to win an Australian title over in Busselton in Western Australia.
Have you raced people that weren't even born when you started racing yet?
I have actually, yeah. One of the races I did last year. So last year I did 5 races and I won 2 of them and had 3 podiums. So I'm not embarrassing myself just yet. So for me, racing is still about performance as much as it is enjoyment.
Right. So you still got the fire and you still love training, right? You train.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I love to train. It's part of my daily routine. Training for lifestyle and training to win world-class caliber races is different. There's more of a mindset and mental approach to that, the latter one, and also an extracurricular massage, physio, dry needling in the gym. And so I'm at a point in life where my wife's back working 5 or 6 days a week, particularly with the pandemic. She's had to work. She's often worked 7 or 10 days straight. So I'm on the home front doing a lot with the kids, which I'm really loving. Because this is the first year I haven't traveled internationally for 27 years actually. So a lot of the promotional work's been online, a lot of online activations, Zoom calls, meeting different audiences in different parts of the world. So what's next is a lot of family time, trying to add value to the sponsors in other avenues outside of performance, but still racing as well. I still train. So you can't when you're training to race at that level, you have to bubble along at about this level. You can't drop it down to here. And then if I get a race that tickles my fancy or something that I get invited to, I like to race against the best people as well. So if I get an opportunity 3 months in advance, I find out there's a race on and I want to do it, I can ramp the training back up. And it takes about 3 months to take it from a simmer to a boil. So, and I still love it. I love it. I love performing at that level and preparing to perform at that level. But I also understand I'm 48 in 6 months. And, the thing about my sport, an endurance sport, is your heart and lungs get strong into your 40s. What tends to need more TLC?
Keep telling yourself that.
Well, it does. It's do the reading, mate. Do the reading. With my idea, I've read up about all of this. Cardiovascularly, you're very strong into your 40s. What's
great? What
diminishes is muscles, bones, musculoskeletally, the chassis. The engine's strong. The body needs a lot more work, and so it comes down to whether you're committed to doing that work, and I am at different times. I don't want it to be a full-time commitment, though.
But that's part of the smarts of it too. In all seriousness, I remember you getting this advice from, I think it was Dave Scott or Mark Allen, about when you've got so much foundation already, under your belt, it's more, you don't have to work as hard.
Yeah.
It's about working smarter, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you need to change the way you do things, and that's another thing that lends itself to prolonging your career, because you don't have to do as much training, and the harder sessions might not be 2 or 3 times a week. You might only need 1 every week or every 10 days, which augurs well for the recovery piece, which you need more of.
Yeah.
So it does make sense from a physiological standpoint that you can race at that level. It then comes down to motivation again. Why are you doing it? And I know one of the great things, or it was your suggestion, to align with some charities and a few other things. When I race, I know all the charities have said to me they get a lot more exposure. They get a lot more traffic to their websites, and because I always promote them in the lead up to the race, and sort of try and choreograph things. So we do some sort of fundraising drive as part of a race preparation or something, and so that makes me feel good that it's just greater than just padding out the resume. As much as that's why you still race as well.
Yeah.
For me, it's always about performance. I don't go in it to make up the numbers. I do it to get 101% out of the 100% that I've got to offer. So, but also I've also got a little coaching business as well, Sensego, which has been going 5 or 6 years now, and I've just taken full control of it this year. It made sense to do it. The timing was right, so I want to invest a lot more time in that because I've been a passenger in that for a long time. But yeah, I think if you do something for a long period of time and you pay attention to the different trends and you surround yourself with enough good people, you can learn a lot. And I feel I've got a lot to give back in the sport to people, whatever their journey, whether they just want to get in shape to run a park run or to have a better round of golf on the weekend, or whether they want to qualify and race at World Championships in triathlon. The principles are the same. They can be adapted to whatever your goal and whatever your background is. So yeah, I've got that little business, so that keeps keeping me busy. But just want to be more present on the home front as well. It's one thing that I kind of, again, no regrets, but I was so focused. You miss a lot of the good stuff that's going on in life with friends and siblings and the family that, I sacrificed a lot for 2 decades or more, and I want to be more present with a lot of those things moving forward. That's sort of my goal or ambition, is just to get more invested in the people around me who understood why I was off doing what I was doing and supported it. But yeah, life moves on, and I think there's other things where you got to be present at as well. So
thanks, Craig. Maybe just one more question, and then we might have to wrap for today. Is there another question there that someone would like to ask Craig?
Hi, Paul.
We can ask a few more. Questions.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll go Susan, then I'll come back to you, Richard.
Okay, just one quick question, Craig. I was just wondering, given, there's always someone behind you that's your support person. I'm just wondering, with regards to Nerida, what's one thing that Nerida supported you with, given her ID, if you can?
Just everything. Well, the emotional thing was huge, but with her ID, I knew she wasn't passionate about triathlon. She liked triathlon, but it wasn't her passion. But I guess she was passionate about me and helping me. So part of her idea is just give me a list and tell me what has to be done and I'll get it done.
Yeah.
And so within the day, there was a lot of things, obviously raising children to start with, but she managed my career too until we had our second child. So she was my manager, and I thought she was an awesome manager because all my sponsors used to say to me, actually, they loved dealing with her because it was very clear what her agenda was, which was me. There was no marketing talk or sales talk. It was, I'm Craig's wife. I'm also his manager. Let's get this done. What do we have to do here? And she had great relationships with all my sponsors. And even when Austin, our second child, came along, she just said to me, I can't do it anymore. It's too busy. So I actually got a manager in. And but she'd managed me for about 6 or 7 years up to that point. And we had great relationships with the sponsors. They loved Neri. They loved her direct approach. And also they would say, look, these are some of the deliverables we've got for Craig. And she'd have a list and she'd say, these are things we've got to get done. Let's plan it. Let's just get it done. Let's check all these boxes. I was just off training. I was thinking, well, I've got 6K in the pool to do this morning, and then I'm going out to ride for 4 hours. But I might be sitting there at breakfast and Neri said, we've got to shoot this little video for them, or we've got to write 5 training tips. Let's just get it. She made it easy for me to check the boxes for the sponsors and get all those deliverables done. And I just liked the fact that the sponsors loved her as well. I know when we used to go to the big races, particularly in Kona, they couldn't wait to catch up with Neri and go out to lunch or dinner. And it just made my life a lot easier because I just saw in that, like any industry, I guess, when you have partners, it's about having clearly defined goals. And sometimes the goals, everyone's not exactly on the same page, although it looks like you are. Neri was just about, very matter-of-fact way, let's just get it done. Let's just make this as painless as possible. This is what they want. Let's do it well, keep them happy. And yeah, so I think on the logistic standpoint, it was so well organized. She's so organized, Neri. She she could have had a job in logistics, because I would come in when we were in Colorado in that final build up to Kona. She would look at my training plan and she'd work the family plan around. When I would want an afternoon nap, she'd time the kids' nap with my afternoon nap. And just fun things like, she knew I was feeling a bit guilty being away from the kids. When we only had Lucy, we got a mountain bike with a seat on the back. So I would go on these 32, 33K runs, and she'd come along on the bike and bring Lucy, our daughter, which made me feel better. I always ran quicker when they were there too. I don't know if I was trying to keep up with the mountain bike, or I just felt better having them there. But when we had 2 and then 3 kids, I remember coming in from a 6 or 7 hour ride. I used to ride 6 or 7 hours twice a week, Wednesday and Saturday, and then I'd run an hour off that. And I'd finish about 12:30, and she'd make sure she'd be home with the kids at right on that time. She'd have 2 bags of ice from the petrol station. We'd pour it in the bath. I'd have an ice bath. 1 or 2 of the kids would hop in with me. And then she'd bring a protein shake, a protein smoothie. So if you know nutrition and the theory, it's best to get that core body temperature cooling with the ice bath immediately after the exercise. And it's also getting the amino acids and the proteins in that 30-minute window. Your recovery is much better, much more effective. So she just made it happen that I would come in from these long training days and she'd have the ice bath ready to go and have that protein shake ready. And it was a team effort, because they're the little things that you just can't do on your own. So, yeah. And then the support on the race too, just the activation around getting T-shirts made up, and just mobilizing a little support cheering army, so to speak, on race.
Grows entourage.
Yeah, it's all the little things, it's the little things, and getting the kids out there the night before the race with the chalk, writing my name on the road at different parts of the course where she knew there wouldn't be a crowd, or where I might need a little lift. Those little details, it made all the difference.
Well, thank you, Craig. Wonderful support. Thank you.
I think next month we'll get Neri in interview Neri.
Be more insightful. Be more insightful, that's for sure.
Okay, Richard, I think you had a question, Richard.
Yeah, Paul. Craig, you mentioned you have a coaching business. Do you use ID as part of that?
That's a good question. Yeah, we have at different times. And so I've taken over control of the business in early this year. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. But that's our plan for sure. And that was some of the discussions I've had with Paul around matching athletes to coaches what will be a better fit, because it's not always, I guess it's the same in business, it's not always about the level of expertise and I guess the science or the background that the coach has. It's about the way they interact with the athlete and making the message land a lot better. So yes, our plan is to utilize ID and matching athletes with coaches, and also on one of the things we did pre-pandemic was we had training camps or training experiences around the world. So we've had a couple in Kona, we've had some in Colorado, we've had one in Mallorca, we've had a couple in Asia, in Singapore.
Wollongong.
We had one in Wollongong that Paul came to, a couple in Sydney, one up in Foster. We've had a couple in South America. We had one in Sao Paulo and one in Colombia, Medellin. A couple up in Canada.
How'd they pay you out of Colombia again?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think what I think, and those camps and experiences are really beneficial, because I guess it's like a workshop in business, isn't it? You get great people around you, you exchange ideas, and after 2 days, it's like you cram a lot into. Plus, you form a network that you stay in touch with once the camp breaks and everybody goes home. So we do some good training, but yeah, the goal would be to bring Paul along to. I know he's probably going to want some of the more exotic locations like Mallorca or
Wollongong.
He did come to Wollongong, but I think just what I've realised with my own experience post, I guess, the World Championship years, but how to interact better with Franco, my manager, and understand my best mate who was very invested in my career, understanding. Because there's so many misunderstandings that where the intentions were good, but resentment would build up because, it's hard to assume positive intent when some things happen. But one of the things I've really resonated with me on these camps was, particularly the ones I had in North America, was our sport is very time consuming, and a lot of the amateur athletes you deal with have families, they have high level jobs, and there's not enough hours in the day to scratch all of those itches. And I know, I was going to say there's 2 or 3 examples. There's probably 10 specific examples that come to mind where I'd be at these camps, and guys and girls would come up to me, and a lot of the problems they were having within their weekly training routines weren't around training or the physical aspect. It was around family and their partner, their husband or wife, their spouse. And, I think I'm not qualified to answer these questions. I mean, I can answer your running questions, or I can talk about nutrition or recovery. We can talk about that until the cows come home. But a lot of these other issues around, I was understanding a lot of the limitations people were having was getting the people in their family on board, or partners at work. And I just thought, that's not my area. That's Paul's area. Trying to set up strategies around how it could look that you get a better outcome and not be fighting these battles at home or at work. So that's, Richard, where I see the value of the ID for sure, because the training is one thing, but it's one small piece. The mindset of training and the, I guess, emotional well-being
of that ecosystem around you
is crucial.
Yeah.
And you see it with professionals, and you see it all the way down to the athletes. I mean, we have beginners and entry-level athletes coming to our camps, and they're the greater challenges, to be honest, not prescribing the training.
Right.
So
thanks,
we hope to get, great question, mate. Great question.
Thank you. And look, I loved your description of what Neri has done as a support person, and I think knowing that ID, just hearing you describe it, was just so fantastic. So well done.
Thanks, Richard.
Maybe I should buy some flowers.
Yeah.
I do a lot. I do buy flowers a lot.
Hey, Craig. I had a question about the combination between when you're visualizing and then the feelings. When you visualize, do you put feelings behind it? Like, for example, is it like a joyful feeling? Do you perform better if you're feeling joyful than if you're feeling, or is it just that you're just serious when you're working? I'm thinking, like, when we go out for a run, sometimes it's like the best time of the day. You put a good song, it's pumping, and that extra boost feels to me I can run faster.
Yeah.
And so, can you just talk about the relationship between your emotional state and if better feelings give you better performance, and if you add that when you're visualizing or not?
Absolutely. And good to see you again, by the way, Jesus.
Hey, good to see you too.
Yeah, I think the mind-body connection is strong in sport, in an athlete. The mind rules the body. So having good feelings is very important. I was a big believer in, I knew it helped me a lot in very, very difficult sessions. I would have a specific playlist. So if it was a real intense, harder run session or bike, yes, I would have really upbeat, and there were certain songs that would just, really get me firing. So I'd always make sure they were in the playlist. And if it was a longer, sort of slower run or ride, I'd always have good songs, but that real top end, I certainly had the pump up tracks, and I could just feel the endorphins and the emotions. You just hear the intro of those songs and they get you going. So I do believe there's a strong mind-body connection there. And in terms of the visualization, absolutely. Like, one of the great things about going to Kona and just feeling the wind and smelling the salt water there and the frangipanis, I could be anywhere and smell something and it would take me straight there. And sometimes I wouldn't even need to smell it. I could be just in the middle of a track session, or I could be running out to Kurnell. I used to do a long run out around Kurnell from here, and I'd have the music on, but I would just somehow go to Kona and I could feel the humidity and the heat, and I could smell the smells, and I would be there. And sometimes I could be laying in bed thinking about it, actually. I would often visualize not even training. Could be anywhere, and I could take myself there, and I could feel all the feels, and I could smell it, and I would get the goosebumps. And for me, that was very powerful. Yeah, which was why part of the reason I went there to train before I actually raced there. And also certain songs too. Like I remember, it was interesting about 3 or 4 years ago. One of the charities I work with, they contacted me and said, we're doing some promotion. We'd like to get some photos of you from when you raced in Kona. So I contacted a professional photographer who I knew was in Kona every year. And I told him what I was doing, and he sent me this file of photos. Just looking at the photos got me pumped up, to be honest, straight away. Right. But there was one photo in particular. I was sitting there right before the start, and he had this photo of me just sitting there, and I had my headphones on. So I thought, I'll go and look for the playlist. And I remember the year, it was 2008. So I went back and found the 2008 playlist, and I trained with it for the next 6 months after that. Actually, it was so good. But it brought back good memories of just being on the pier in Kona and hearing a lot of those songs. Took me back and took me to the race. So then I used that in my training for the next 6 months to inspire me. And I think when I was planning all of the races, it's important to understand what the important performance components are. And as an athlete, obviously that's the physical, but it's also the mental. And I used to look at them in isolation, but then you got to bring them back together, because that mind-body connection is so strong in a lot of things, particularly sport. So, yeah, that visualization and music and all those things, I think, can trigger great performance, and an elevated can prime you for great performance.
Is it just because they're upbeat, or do they have to also be happy or joyful? Is it the positive emotions, or is it just the that they're fast songs?
I can only speak for myself. I think for a lot of different reasons. I remember just a lot of songs, I just hear them and they're upbeat and they get me going. But other songs, I specifically relate to hearing it right before the gun went off at a certain race, and that brings back a lot of joy. So I think both reasons.
Right.
Great question.
Thank you.
Great question. So, guys, I think we will bring today to a close. It's been really gracious of you, Craig, firstly to give up your time and come along and share with everyone, but to stay a little longer and just, cover off some other questions that everyone had. So thank you so much for sharing your history, your perspective and yourself, and about your family as well. I think a lot of people have commented on your authenticity, which is always one of your hallmarks. Thank you, everyone, for being on the call and being, being so engaged all the way through, and for the questions that you asked. So we'll see you next week with one of our next webinars. We'll send out material on that later today and through the coming week. And then I'll also announce our next interview, which is coming up on, I think it's December 4 and 5, that Wednesday, Thursday. I'll get the time right, and you'll see some publicity on that starting to come out in the coming weeks. Have a great day. Thanks again for being here. We'll see you next week. All the best, guys.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Craig. Great. Cheers.